She set her trunk down on the depot platform, and a man she had never met looked her over like a horse at auction, then turned his back and walked away. "Too educated," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't need a wife who argues with me using words I can't even spell." The laughter came fast. Anna Whitmore stood there with her chin up and her hands shaking, holding a copy of Emerson against her chest like a shield. If you believe a woman's education should never be used against her, subscribe to our channel and follow this story until the very end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The man's name was Gerald Pruitt, and he had been corresponding with Anna for 4 months. 4 months of letters. 4 months of carefully chosen words about the land, the promise of the West, the life he intended to build. He had written to the Boston Ladies Placement Bureau, asking for a capable woman, well-spoken and steady. Anna had answered honestly the way she answered everything, with full disclosure. She was a certified schoolteacher. She had completed 2 years at the Boston Normal School. She had taught reading and arithmetic to children in the Beacon Hill district. She had opinions about land management, about women's property rights, about the future of frontier education. Gerald Pruitt had read her letters and thought capable, well-spoken, steady. Yes, he had not thought past that. When Anna stepped off the eastbound line at the Claremore Depot in the Oklahoma Territory on a Tuesday morning in late October, she was wearing her second-best dress because her best one had gotten coffee spilled on it in the dining car, and she had spent the last 40 minutes of the trip scrubbing at the stain in a small basin that barely held enough water to wet her fingers. She had her hair pinned her shoulders straight, and a trunk that contained every book she owned, which was 23 books plus her teaching certificates rolled in oilskin, plus 1 photograph of her mother. Gerald Pruitt was waiting on the platform with a man she didn't know, and he looked her over once the way a buyer looks at a piece of furniture that arrived from the catalog and turned out to be smaller than expected. He said, "Miss Whitmore." She said, "Mr. Pruitt, it's good to finally." "You brought a lot of books," he said. She glanced at the porter who was unloading her trunk. "Yes, I'm a teacher. You teach here, you'll be teaching my children, not anybody else's. I understand that, and I need a wife who knows how to keep a house quiet, not one who's always got an opinion." Anna stopped. The word always landed wrong because they had been standing together for less than 90 seconds. "I've only just arrived," she said carefully. "I haven't offered any opinion yet." "You're offering one right now," he said. "That look on your face, that's an opinion." The man beside him, thick arms, narrow eyes, chewing something, made a sound that might have been a laugh. Anna looked at Gerald Pruitt steadily. "I was told you wanted a capable woman." "Capable, yes. Educated to the point of correcting a man in his own house, no." He folded his arms. "I heard about you from some of the other men who looked at the Bureau's list. They said you wrote letters that were too formal, too much like a contract." "They were well written," Anna said. "They were written like you think you're smarter than the man reading them." "I think a correspondence should be honest. And there it is," Gerald Pruitt said almost to himself, and turned to the man beside him. "Too educated. I said it when I read the first letter. I should have trusted my gut." He looked back at her, not unkindly, but not kindly. Either the way a man looks at a problem he's decided is not his problem. "I'm sorry you made the trip, Miss Whitmore. I'll pay for your meal at the hotel while you arrange your return." "My return," Anna said. "Back to Boston." "I've given up my position in Boston," she said. The Bureau was informed of this. There was an agreement. The agreement was conditional on a mutual finding of suitability, Gerald Pruitt said, and she heard in his voice the satisfaction of a man who had memorized the one clause that protected him. "I don't find us suitable." He tipped his hat. "Good day." He walked away. The man with the thick arms watched her for a moment, then followed. The porter set her trunk down at her feet. The platform was not empty. There were several people who had witnessed the exchange, travelers and locals waiting for connections. A woman in a gray wool coat. 2 men outside the telegraph office. Nobody came over. One woman looked at Anna with an expression that held something between sympathy and relief, the relief of a person who is grateful it isn't them standing there. Anna put her hand on top of her trunk and held it there. She was 22 years old. She had $43 in her purse, which was the remainder of her savings after the train fare. She had no family in the territory, no contact name beyond Gerald Pruitt's, and no return ticket because she had spent the last of her railroad credit on the westbound passage after the bureau told her the placement was confirmed. She was not going to cry on the depot platform. She had made herself that promise on the train somewhere around Missouri when the doubt had gotten loud enough to keep her awake. Whatever happens, she had told herself, you will not cry where people can see. So she stood with her hand on her trunk, and she looked out at the main street of Claremore and thought with a clarity that surprised her that it was a smaller town than the bureau's description had implied. That was when she heard the boots. Not hurried, not the quick step of someone coming to help. Just a slow, measured sound on the wooden planks, like a man who moved at the pace he decided on and didn't adjust it for anything. She turned. He was tall, taller than she'd expected anyone to be. Somehow, though she couldn't have said why she was expecting anything at all. Dark coat worn, but clean. Hat brim down enough to shade his face. He was looking at her trunk, not at her, and when he reached it, he crouched without a word and checked the latches the way a man checks something before he lifts it, making sure it won't fall apart in his hands. Then he picked it up. "Excuse me," Anna said. He looked at her then. He had dark eyes and a face that had seen weather not old, but marked the kind of face that's been tested by seasons rather than years. He didn't smile. He didn't apologize for picking up her belongings without asking. He just waited to see what she was going to say. "That's mine," she said. "I know," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, the same rhythm as his walk. "Where do you want it?" I haven't decided where I'm going." He said nothing to that. He just held the trunk like it weighed nothing, which it didn't weigh nothing. It weighed close to 60 pounds, with the books, and waited. "Who are you?" she asked. "Jack Holloway." He said it like it was enough information, which apparently he felt it was. "Did someone send you? Did Mr. Pruitt?" "No." "Then why are you?" "You've been standing here for 10 minutes, Jack Holloway said. "Your trunk's been sitting on the platform. You've got the look of somebody who needs to sit down and think, and you can't do that standing here with everyone watching." Anna looked around. He was right. People were still looking. The woman in the gray coat had not moved. "I'm not in distress," Anna said because she needed to say it. "Didn't say you were," Jack said. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own. Where do you want the trunk?" he asked again, not cutting her off exactly, just returning to the question. She looked at him for a long moment. "Is there a hotel?" she asked. "Caldwell's boarding house is better, cleaner. Mrs. Caldwell doesn't overcharge single women." "How would you know that?" "She told me once. Said it was a matter of principle." Something shifted in his face, so small it was barely an expression at all, but she thought it might have been a near approach to wry. "Said she'd seen enough single women get taken advantage of in this town." Anna picked up her book bag, the smaller one she'd carried herself from the train, and straightened her shoulders. "Caldwell's then," she said. He walked. She walked beside him. He didn't offer his arm, and she didn't expect it. They were halfway down the main street when a man called out from across the road, "Holloway, that Pruitt's reject." Jack didn't stop walking. He didn't look at the man. He said nothing. The man called out again. "She know you can barely string 2 words together. Might be a good match, she's got. Too many words, you've got too few." More laughter. Anna kept her eyes forward and felt the heat rise in her face and forced it down. "Does that happen often?" she asked when they'd put some distance between themselves and the voice. "To me," Jack said. "Often enough." "That doesn't bother you?" "It bothered me more when I was younger," he said. He said it simply without self-pity, the way a person states a fact about geography. Mrs. Caldwell was a small square woman with flour on her apron and the eyes of someone who had assessed thousands of people at her door and held strong opinions about all of them. She looked at Anna, then at Jack, then at the trunk he was still carrying. "Anna Whitmore," Anna said. "I need a room, possibly for several days while I determine my situation." "Your situation being that Gerald Pruitt is a fool," Mrs. Caldwell said. It was not a question. "My situation being that my arrangement fell through," Anna said carefully. "I heard him at the depot," Mrs. Caldwell said. "Half the town did. Too educated. Lord give me strength." She opened the door wider. "Come in. Room is $2 a week, breakfast included. Jack put that in the corner room." Jack carried the trunk upstairs without being told which room the corner room was, which meant he'd been in the boarding house before and knew the layout, which meant Mrs. Caldwell trusted him enough to let him up the stairs, which Anna filed away as information. When he came back down, Mrs. Caldwell had already put a cup of tea in front of Anna and was cutting bread. Jack stood in the doorway, hat in his hand. "Thank you," Anna said. "Mr. Holloway, truly." He nodded once. "Can I ask, why did you help me?" He turned his hat in his hands. It was the first sign of anything like uncertainty she'd seen from him. "Pruitt shouldn't have said what he said the way he said it," he said finally. "Not in front of people." "He had the right to refuse the match," Anna said. "That's in the agreement." "Right, and decent aren't always the same thing," Jack said. He put his hat on and left. Mrs. Caldwell watched the door close and then said without looking up from the bread, "He's been on his own a long time, that one." "What does he do?" Anna asked. "Runs Holloway Ranch. Has for 12 years since his father died. About 800 acres northeast of town. Good land if you know what you're doing, and he does." She set the bread down. "He doesn't come into town much. Doesn't talk much when he does. People think he's simple because he's quiet." "Is he?" Mrs. Caldwell looked at her directly then. "What do you think?" Anna thought about the way he'd checked the trunk latches before lifting it. The way he'd known exactly where Caldwell's was, and exactly which room was the corner room, and exactly what Mrs. Caldwell's policy on charging single women was. The way he'd said, right and decent aren't always the same thing without any apparent effort, like it was a conclusion he'd reached a long time ago, and it lived close to the surface. "No," she said. "I don't think he's simple." "No," Mrs. Caldwell agreed, and left it at that. Bag. Anna spent 3 days at Caldwell's boarding house. On the first day, she wrote to the Boston Ladies Placement Bureau, explaining what had happened and requesting guidance on next steps. She did not use the word humiliated. She used the phrase placement did not proceed as anticipated. On the second day, she walked through the town carefully introducing herself, where it seemed appropriate, looking for any indication that there might be a teaching position available, a school that needed staffing, any family willing to take on a tutor. She asked at the general store. She asked at the church. The minister's wife listened politely and then said that the school teacher position had been filled back in the spring, and she wasn't aware of any families looking for private tutoring, but she'd keep her ears open. On the second day, she also heard from 3 different people that she was the woman Pruitt had turned away for being too educated. The first person said it with curiosity, the way people mention an interesting fact. The second said it with sympathy, touching Anna's arm. The third said it with a small, flat smile that told Anna the woman thought Pruitt had made a reasonable decision. On the third day, Anna sat down with her $43 and her teaching certificates and worked out precisely how long she could survive on what she had. 6 weeks at Caldwell's rates, if she ate almost nothing beyond breakfast. After that, she had no plan. She was sitting with that calculation 6 weeks written in the margin of her journal, circled, when Jack Holloway knocked on the door of the boarding house. Mrs. Caldwell showed him into the small sitting room, where Anna had been using the window light to write, and he stood just inside the doorway with his hat in his hands again, and looked at the papers spread on the table. "Still here," he said. "Still here," she agreed. "There don't appear to be many teaching opportunities available at present. No school in town needs anyone. Not until spring, potentially, and that's not certain." She folded her hands on the table. "Was there something you needed, Mr. Holloway?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone thinking through what to say. more the quiet of someone who has already decided and is now making himself say it. "I have a proposition," he said. "I'm listening." "I need help," he said. "On the ranch. Mrs. Delgado handles the house. She's been with us since my father's time, but I've got workers now who need someone who can manage accounts, letters, correspondence with suppliers." He paused. "Things that need writing." Anna looked at him steadily. "You need a bookkeeper. I need someone who can read and write well and manage correspondence." He said each word deliberately, like he was making sure not to say more or less than he meant. "I can pay you a fair wage. It's legitimate work. Mrs. Delgado can speak to the arrangement's propriety." "What happened to whoever was handling your correspondence before?" A brief stillness. "I managed it myself," he said. Something in the way he said it, the slight overcare of the words, the same overcare she'd noticed when he'd explained his proposition, caught at the edge of her attention. But she let it pass for now. "What's the wage?" she asked. He named a figure. It was not generous, but it was fair, and it was more than 6 weeks at Caldwell's. "And accommodations?" she asked. "Mrs. Delgado's room is across from the main house. You'd have your own. And the work is only accounts and correspondence. And anything else you're capable of doing that needs doing," he said. "I don't waste resources." Anna looked at her journal, at the 6 weeks circled in the margin. She looked at the window. She looked at Jack Holloway, who was still standing in the doorway holding his hat, and looking at her with those dark, quiet eyes that gave away very little. "All right," she said. Something in his posture shifted slightly, so slightly she might have imagined it. "All right," he repeated. "When would you need me?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll come with the wagon at 7. He put his hat back on, said good day to Mrs. Caldwell in the hall, and left. Mrs. Caldwell came to the sitting room doorway and looked at Anna. "Well," she said. "I know," Anna said. "He's a private man." "I noticed. He doesn't ask for help easily." Mrs. Caldwell folded her arms. "If he's asking, he needs it more than he's letting on." Anna looked at the door he'd just walked out of. She thought again about the careful, deliberate way he'd listed what he needed. Things that need writing. Not things I can't do. Things that need writing. She picked up her pencil and wrote at the bottom of the journal page. "There is something he is not saying. Find out what it is before you agree to more than you've agreed to." Then she looked at what she'd written and thought too late. "You've already agreed." The ranch was 8 miles northeast of town, and Jack Holloway drove the wagon in almost complete silence for the entire distance. Anna did not try to fill it. She had learned in her years of teaching small children that silence was information. A child who went quiet was usually processing something, working something out, holding something and waiting. She had the sense that Jack Holloway's silence was the same kind. Not emptiness. Occupation. She looked at the land instead. It was wide and pale gold in the late October light. The grass flattened by wind cottonwood trees along the creek line with their last few yellow leaves. The sky was enormous. In Boston, the sky was a strip of light between buildings. Here it went all the way to the ground in every direction. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked. 12 years, he said. "And before that your father?" "Before that my father." "Yes." "Is he?" "Dead. 12 years ago." "I'm sorry." He nodded, acknowledging the condolence without deflecting it or expanding on it. "Do you have family nearby?" she asked. "No." "Brothers, sisters?" "One brother, in Kansas. We don't—" He stopped. "We're not close." She nodded and let that pass too. When they arrived at the ranch, Mrs. Delgado came out of the main house before the wagon had fully stopped. She was a woman of about 50, dark-haired and wide-shouldered, with the particular energy of a person who runs a household efficiently and knows it. "Miss Whitmore," she said, and the warmth was immediate and genuine, like she'd been waiting for this and was pleased it had finally happened. "I'm Maria Delgado. Come, let me show you your room. You must be cold from the drive." She was taken inside, shown a room that was small but clean and had a good lamp and 2 windows, and given coffee and a piece of cornbread, while Mrs. Delgado explained the household's rhythms, meals, at what times, what her own duties covered, which rooms were private and which were shared, where the washwater came from. Anna listened carefully and said, "Mrs. Delgado, what does Mr. Holloway expect of me exactly?" He said, "Accounts and correspondence." Mrs. Delgado paused in the middle of pouring more coffee. She set the pot down deliberately. "He told you that?" "Yes." "Is it not accurate?" Mrs. Delgado sat down across from her. She looked at Anna with an expression that was neither concealing nor revealing, just careful. "Mr. Holloway needs help with a great many things," she said. "Some of them he's able to name. Some of them—" She stopped. "He'll show you what he needs. He's not a man who explains himself ahead of time." "That's a careful answer," Anna said. "Yes, it is," Mrs. Delgado said, and picked up the coffee pot again. In her first week at Holloway Ranch, Anna organized the accounts. It was worse than she'd expected. Not corrupt, she found no evidence of fraud in what Jack himself had entered, but chaotic, in the way that things become chaotic when someone has been managing them in the dark. Estimates where there should have been figures. Approximations where there should have been records. Invoices tucked into the pages of a ledger with no notation about whether they'd been paid or disputed. 3 different supplier agreements folded into a horse medicine tin. She spent 4 days sorting, cataloging, and reconciling. She made a clean ledger. She wrote letters to 3 suppliers clarifying account balances. On the 4th afternoon, Jack came into the small room off the main hall that she'd been using as an office and looked at the clean ledger without picking it up. "Everything balanced?" he asked. "Essentially, yes. There were some discrepancies I had questions about." She opened the ledger to the page she'd marked. "This figure here, this is a payment to Mallory Land and Contract Associates. There are 5 of them over the past 2 years. Do you have the corresponding contracts for these payments?" Something happened in Jack's face. The careful blankness she'd come to recognize as his neutral expression shifted just slightly toward something she couldn't name. Not anger, not fear, something in between. "I have them," he said. "Could I see them? I want to make sure the payment amounts match the contract terms." A long pause. "I'll find them," he said, and left the room. He didn't bring them that day, or the next. On the 6th evening, Anna was reading at the kitchen table when Jack came in and sat down across from her. He didn't have papers with him. He just sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the middle distance. After a while he said, "What did you teach in Boston?" She looked up from her book. The question had a quality that told her it wasn't casual. "Reading and arithmetic primarily, some basic geography and history." "Just children." "Yes. Why?" He was quiet again. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "what is it you actually need from me?" He didn't look at her. He looked at his hands on the table, and she saw him make a small decision. She could see it the moment he landed on something, and then he looked up. "I need you to teach me," he said. "The same as you'd teach a child. Reading, writing, numbers the kind that go on paper." His voice was level, but there was something beneath it that cost him effort to keep level. "I can figure most things. I can manage land and cattle and weather and men, but words on paper—" He stopped. "I can't. Not the way other men can." Anna put her book down slowly. She thought about the careful way he'd listed what he needed. She thought about the horse medicine tin with the invoices in it. She thought about the look on his face when she'd asked about the Mallory contracts. "How long?" she asked quietly. "All my life," he said. "My father the same. We managed. But something shifted old and heavy. But it's gotten harder. The more land I have, the more contracts. The more contracts, the more I'm signing things I can't fully—" He stopped. "You've been signing documents you can't read," she said. "I can pick out words," he said with a dignity that made her chest hurt a little. I know what a number looks like. I can read a branded mark. I can follow a map if someone draws it straight. but a legal document. He shook his head. I can see there are words. I can tell by how the man explains it whether he seems trustworthy. That's all. Anna was quiet for a moment. The Mallory contracts, she said. His jaw tightened. You signed them without fully knowing what was in them, she said. Victor Mallory explained them to me, he said. He's the land agent for half the contracts in this county. He said the terms were standard. Anna thought about the payment figures she'd seen. 5 payments over 2 years, each one slightly higher than the last, with no clear corresponding service that she could identify. She thought about the phrase standard terms coming from a man who knew the person across the table from him couldn't verify them. She didn't say what she was thinking. Not yet. Mr. Holloway, she said, I'll teach you. He looked at her. I'll teach you everything, she said. Reading, writing. How to read a contract line by line and understand what every clause means. How numbers on a page represent real money and real land. She kept her voice matter-of-fact because she could see that any softness would be worse than useless to him right now. It will take time. You'll be a quick learner, I think, but it will take time. Are you willing to commit to that? Why do you think I'll be quick, he said. Because you already know how to think, she said. I've watched you this week. You read land the way some men read books. You see patterns in how the cattle move and you calculate from them. You know what weather is coming from how the wind shifts. That's not nothing, Mr. Holloway. That's a kind of intelligence that some of the most educated men I've ever met don't have. She looked at him steadily. Reading is a skill, not a measure of a man's mind. You've never had someone teach you properly. That's different from being unable to learn. He was quiet for a long moment. I'll want those Mallory contracts, she said. Before we start anything else. Why? Because if Victor Mallory has been explaining terms to a man he knows can't read them, Anna said carefully, I want to know exactly what terms he chose to explain. The silence that followed was different from his usual silences. It was the silence of a man who has just heard something he already knew, said aloud for the first time by someone other than himself. I'll get them, he said. He stood up, paused. Miss Whitmore? Yes. What Pruitt said at the depot, he said, looking at the wall rather than her. About you knowing too much. He turned his hat in his hands. She'd noticed he did that when something mattered. Some men are afraid of what they don't understand. That's their problem, not yours. He put his hat on and walked out. Anna sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he left, looking at the lamp flame. She had come west looking for a new life. She had not expected to find a man who understood, without being told that being rejected for knowing too much was not a reflection on the knowing. She picked up her book, set it back down. Outside, she could hear the wind moving across the land, that wide, enormous, indifferent wind of the Oklahoma Territory that went all the way to the ground in every direction. She thought, teach me everything. She thought, all right, let's begin. The Mallory contracts were in a tin box under the floorboard in Jack's office. He brought them out the next morning, without ceremony, set them on the table in front of Anna, and stepped back like a man placing something dangerous at a safe distance. 7 documents. Each one folded in thirds, the paper stiff and slightly yellowed at the edges. Each one signed at the bottom in Jack Holloway's name, the letters large and careful and slightly uneven. The signature of a man who had practiced writing his name and only his name until it looked deliberate. Anna unfolded the first one and read it through completely before she said anything. Then she read it again. Mr. Holloway, she said without looking up, what did Victor Mallory tell you this agreement covered? Jack was standing near the window. Grazing rights extension on the east pasture, he said. He said the county had reclassified the boundary, and I needed to pay a processing fee to maintain access. A processing fee, Anna said. $40. He said it was standard. Anna set the document down. She picked up the second one. And this one. Water access renegotiation. The creek runs along the north edge of my land. He said the water rights needed to be formally registered, or I could lose legal access. He paused. $60. And he explained all of this to you verbally? Yes. And you signed based on his explanation? Yes. His voice was flat, but the flatness was the kind that comes from holding something steady by force. Anna read through the second contract, then the third. She set them in a row on the table and looked at them together the way she sometimes looked at a child's arithmetic work, not at the individual numbers, but at the pattern the errors made. The pattern was clear. Each contract had a legitimate-sounding surface purpose: grazing rights, water access, road easement boundary surveying. Each one had a payment attached that Mallory had described as a fee. But buried in the language of each document past the first paragraph where the stated purpose lived were additional clauses. Clauses about default conditions. Clauses about what happened if any payment was missed. Clauses that taken together gave Victor Mallory's company a legal claim against portions of Holloway Ranch's land value in the event of non-payment. Not a fee, a lien. 7 liens stacked on top of each other over 2 years. She kept her face neutral. "How did you meet Victor Mallory?" she asked. "He came to the ranch," Jack said. "About 2.5 years ago. Said he was the county's appointed land contract administrator. Said he was visiting all the major landholders in the territory to make sure their documentation was in order." He was quiet for a moment. "He seemed official. He had papers with county seals on them. Did you verify those seals with the county office?" A pause. "No." "Have you ever had reason to go to the county office yourself for any land matter?" Mallory said he handled all county submissions on behalf of clients in this district. Anna looked at the contracts. "Mr. Holloway, has Victor Mallory ever given you a receipt? After any of these payments?" The silence that followed told her the answer before he spoke it. He said the signed contract was the receipt. She nodded slowly, the way she used to nod when a child answered a question that revealed exactly how the confusion had started, the precise moment where the wrong turn had been taken. "I need to go to the county land office," she said. "When? Today, if possible. I need to see the actual registered documents for this ranch. What's on file there?" She looked up at him. "Will you take me?" He looked at the contracts on the table. Something moved across his face, not quite shame, but related to it. The particular expression of a man who has just had the full shape of something, confirmed that he had been half suspecting for a long time without letting himself know it. "Yes," he said. "I'll take you." The county land office was in Claremore in a low stone building 2 blocks from the depot. The clerk was a young man with ink-stained fingers who looked up when they came in with the practiced neutrality of a person who dealt with unhappy landholders regularly. Anna set 3 of the Mallory contracts on the counter. "I'd like to see the registered land documents for Holloway Ranch," she said. "All of them, please." The clerk looked at the contracts, then at Jack, then back at Anna. "You his—" "I manage his accounts," Anna said. "The documents, please." The clerk disappeared into the back. Jack stood beside Anna at the counter and said nothing. She could feel the stillness coming off him, the particular stillness of a man who is controlling himself very carefully. The clerk came back with a folder. He opened it on the counter. Anna went through every page. She compared each registered document against the contracts Mallory had had Jack sign. 3 of the Mallory contracts had no corresponding registered document in the county file. They had never been submitted for registration. The payments Jack had made documented in Mallory's contracts as fees for county processing had apparently never reached the county at all. "These 3, Anna said to the clerk, pointing, "they reference county processing filings. Do you have any filing record for these dates?" The clerk looked, flipped through a log, looked again. "No, ma'am. Nothing under Holloway for those dates. Nothing at all." "Nothing?" He looked uncomfortable. "If there was a filing, it would be here." Anna gathered the contracts. She thanked the clerk. She walked out with Jack beside her. They stood in the street, and she told him plainly what she'd found. She didn't soften it. She had learned in that first week that Jack Holloway didn't want softening. He wanted accuracy. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "He took the money and filed nothing. For 3 of the payments, yes. That's what the record indicates. And the contracts themselves, the liens, are not registered, which means they may not be legally enforceable as written. But Mr. Holloway, she made herself say it carefully, that doesn't mean he can't try to enforce them. A man willing to falsify county filings is willing to do other things. Jack's jaw was tight. I need to find out what he's done with the other 4. Yes, and you need to talk to a lawyer. I don't know a lawyer. Then we find one, Anna said. Today. He looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, the kind of direct, unguarded attention he rarely offered. You're not what Pruitt said you were, he said. What did Pruitt say I was? Too much for a man to handle. The corner of his mouth moved. Almost. He was wrong about the too much part. The lawyer's name was Patterson, and he operated out of the back room of the general store because the town wasn't large enough yet to sustain a dedicated legal office. He was a slight man of about 45 who had the habit of reading documents twice before he said anything about them, which Anna respected. He read the Mallory contracts twice. Then he said, "How long ago was the first one signed?" 2.5 years, Jack said. And the payments have all been made. Yes. Patterson set the documents down and folded his hands. The liens are written in a way that's designed to look like standard contract language. Most men wouldn't catch the clauses without reading carefully. He paused, then said with a lawyer's careful tact, "Or at all." Jack didn't flinch. "I know I missed them," he said. "Tell me what they mean now that someone has read them." They mean that Victor Mallory has constructed a legal argument that he's owed a sum based on these contracts that is significantly larger than the payments you've made. And if he moves to enforce that argument in court, the liens could potentially be applied to your land as collateral. He looked at Jack over the papers. He'd have to prove validity in front of a judge, but he'd need a judge willing to look past some convenient omissions. "Can he find one?" Anna asked. Patterson said nothing, which was itself an answer. "What do we need to do?" Jack asked. "Document everything," Patterson said. "The county records you checked today get copies. The payment history. Any correspondence from Mallory." He looked at Jack directly. "And don't sign anything else, anything at all. If Mallory approaches you again..." "He won't find me signing anything I haven't had read to me," Jack said. Patterson nodded. On the drive back to the ranch, the light was going orange and long across the grass, and Anna sat beside Jack and thought about 7 contracts and a man with county seals that had apparently been convincing enough to work on anyone who couldn't read them closely. She thought about how precisely the trap was designed. Not crude, elegant in a grim way. Layered, patient, built over time, one document at a time. "How many other ranchers do you think he's done this to?" she said. Jack was quiet for a while. "Holloway's not the only ranch in this territory run by someone who doesn't..." He stopped, started again. "There are men out here who are good at what they do and can't read a contract. He'd know that. A man like that would know exactly who to target." "Yes," Anna said. "He would." They rode in silence for a while. "How angry are you?" she asked. He turned to look at her. It wasn't a question he'd expected. "Angry enough," he said finally. "Not at you. I know," she said. "That's not what I was asking." He turned back to the road. "I'm angry at myself," he said, "for letting it go as long as I did. There were times when something felt wrong about a payment or about the way he explained something, and He exhaled. "I told myself I was being careful, that I was watching him, but what I was really doing was hoping I was wrong." He glanced at her. "That's a different thing." "Yes," she said. "It is. You stopped hoping and started looking," he said. "That's why you found it in 2 days when I'd had it in front of me for 2 years." "I could read the documents," Anna said. "That's the only difference." "No," he said. "It's not." He said it with a quiet certainty that didn't invite argument. The lesson started the next morning. Anna had thought about how to begin. She'd taught children, and she knew the difference between a child's shame and an adult's. A child's shame is loud. It cries and refuses and throws things. An adult's shame is silent. It sits rigid and waits for humiliation. She wasn't going to give Jack Holloway a children's primer. She wasn't going to start from the beginning in a way that felt like the beginning. She started with what he already knew. "Write your name," she said. She put a piece of paper and a pencil in front of him at the kitchen table. He wrote it. Jack Holloway, large and careful, the letters he'd practiced until they were automatic. "Good," she said. "Now you know what those letters sound like, don't you? Jack. "I know them," he said. When I see words together, they stop making sense. They become shapes." "That's where we'll start," she said, "with shapes that make sounds, one at a time." He looked at her steadily. "How long will this take? To read a simple sentence weeks. To read a contract months. To read comfortably without effort." She was honest. "Longer. But Mr. Holloway, you'll be faster than you think. You already know more than you realize." "You said that before." "I meant it before." He picked up the pencil. What happened over the next 3 weeks was not a transformation. It was not dramatic. It was daily work, the kind that doesn't look like much from the outside. 40 minutes each evening at the kitchen table, sometimes longer, if the ranch day had ended early, sometimes cut short, when something needed handling outdoors. Mrs. Delgado left coffee without being asked, and found reasons to be in the other room. Jack was not a natural reader the way some people are. He had to work for every letter-sound connection, had to rebuild something in his mind that had never been built in the first place. But Anna had been right about one thing: he was fast in the ways that mattered. He remembered everything she told him. He didn't need to be told the same thing twice. He found patterns quickly once he understood that letters had sounds and sounds made words. He started seeing patterns in word endings, in the shapes of common short words, in the way certain letter combinations behaved. He also worked at it when she wasn't in the room. She found evidence of this: a piece of paper on the table one morning, with the same 5 words written out 20 times each. Neatly but laboriously, the pencil pressed hard into the paper, the way a man writes who is not accustomed to the instrument. She didn't mention it. She just adjusted that evening's lesson to the next step. What she hadn't expected was how much he taught her in return. Not deliberately, not as any kind of exchange. But Jack Holloway knew things about the land and the animals and the weather that no book she'd read had told her, and he knew them in a precise, articulate way that came out in the evenings when the lesson was done, and they sat with coffee and talked. One evening she said, "How do you know when it's going to rain?" "Cattle bunch together face east," he said. "Horses get restless an hour before. The grass smells different." He paused. "The light gets a particular yellow. Not the sunset yellow. Different. Older." "Can you teach me to see that?" He looked surprised. It was one of the few times she'd seen him caught off guard. "You want to learn it? You said you read the land the way some men read books," she said. "I want to know how." Something shifted in his face then. Not the near smile she'd seen a few times. Something more serious than that. "All right," he said. "I'll teach you." And that was how it became genuinely reciprocal. Not the transaction they'd agreed to, but something that transaction had quietly become, without either of them naming it. She taught him letters. He taught her land. Mrs. Delgado watched them from the kitchen doorway sometimes and said nothing, but her expression was the expression of a woman who knows exactly what she's looking at and is patient enough to let it develop on its own schedule. The trouble came at the end of the 3rd week. Victor Mallory arrived at the ranch. Anna was in the office when she heard the wagon. She looked out and saw a man she didn't recognize, well dressed for the territory. A hat that said "City Money," a way of sitting in his seat that said authority before he'd opened his mouth. He got down from the wagon and looked at the main house with the assessing eye of someone calculating value. Jack came out from the direction of the barn. Anna went to the doorway of the office. She could hear them from there. "Holloway," the man said. His voice was smooth and pleasant, the practiced pleasantness of a salesman. "Good to see you. I've got the new survey document we discussed. We didn't discuss any survey, Jack said. A small pause. Sure we did. Back in September, you mentioned the north fence line. I mentioned it. I didn't agree to anything. Another pause. Mallory's voice shifted slightly, recalibrated. Well, I brought it out as a courtesy. Just needs your signature to initiate the survey process. No payment up front. No, Jack said. Mallory laughed an easy laugh. Jack, it's a standard. I said no. Jack's voice had not changed in volume or temperature, but something in it had changed. A quality that Anna could only describe as finality. I'm not signing anything without having it read through first. A silence. Read through, Mallory said. And in those two words, Anna heard something of very brief hesitation, like a man's foot finding unexpected ground. By my accounts, manager, Jack said. You're... Mallory stopped. Since when do you have an accounts manager? Since 3 weeks ago. Another silence longer. I'd like to meet her, Mallory said. His voice was still smooth, but the smoothness was now deliberate, the way you make something smooth by working at it. She's busy, Jack said. If you have paperwork for this ranch, you can leave it with me, and she'll review it. Jack, we've always dealt directly. Directly is still fine, Jack said. Leave the documents, she'll review them. If everything's in order, we can talk. Mallory didn't leave any documents. He made a few more easy, pleasant sounds. No rush, just checking in, always a pleasure, and got back into his wagon. Anna watched him drive away. Jack came into the office. He didn't say anything, but he stood in the doorway in a way that was almost a question. I heard, she said. He'll be back, Jack said. Yes. She looked at the window where Mallory's wagon had disappeared. And next time, he'll have done some research on who I am. She looked back at Jack. He'll know I came here from the depot after Pruitt refused me. He'll know I have no standing here. No family, no local connections. She paused. He'll try to use that. Jack looked at her. Let him try, he said. It was not a boast. It was the same flat, certain voice he used for facts about the land, the voice of someone stating a condition rather than making a threat. Anna turned back to the desk. Mr. Holloway, she said, I want to write to Patterson tonight. I want him to start building a proper record of everything we found at the county office. I'll have Mrs. Delgado bring more lamp oil, he said. She started writing. He stayed in the doorway for a moment longer, then left, and she could hear his boots on the floor of the main house, slow, steady, the same rhythm they always were. She wrote for 2 hours. At some point, Mrs. Delgado brought lamp oil and also a plate of food, set it beside the writing materials without comment, and left. Anna ate without stopping her work and thought about Victor Mallory's face when Jack had said accounts manager, the way the smoothness had required maintenance for just a second. That second. That small, unguarded second, where the calculation had been visible. He hadn't expected Jack to have someone who could read. She thought, good, let him be surprised. We're not done surprising him yet. She finished the letter to Patterson, folded it, addressed it, set it with the other documents she'd been organizing, looked at the stack of papers on the desk, 2.5 years of Jack Holloway's careful, isolated, exploited trust, laid out in evidence. Then she picked up the reading primer she'd been building for him, words written in her own hand on sheets of paper, organized in the order she was teaching them, and she turned to the page they'd been on. Tomorrow, they would keep going. Mallory could wait. The lessons could not. Patterson wrote back in 4 days. His letter was 2 pages dense and careful, the kind of writing that a lawyer produces when he is both alarmed and trying not to show it. Anna read it at the kitchen table with her coffee going cold beside her, and Jack sitting across from her watching her face, the way he'd learned to watch it, reading her expression for information, the way he read the land. What does he say? Jack asked. She set the letter down. He says the liens as written carry enough legal weight to be presented in court. Enforceability would depend on the judge. She paused. He also says Victor Mallory is not just a land agent. What is he? He's the primary contractor for the County Land Administration Office. He has a formal appointment, which means he has access to county filing records, county seal documents. She stopped. And county judges. Jack was quiet. Patterson says there are 2 other ranches in the territory that have had Mallory-related contract disputes in the past 18 months. She continued. One was settled out of court. The rancher signed over a strip of land along the creek boundary. The other went to hearing, and the rancher lost 120 acres. The silence in the kitchen was the kind that has weight. He targeted people who couldn't fight back, Jack said. Not a question. People who couldn't read the documents, Anna said, which amounts to the same thing. Jack stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, and she let him have that. He needed a moment to be angry without an audience. When he turned around, his face was controlled, but his eyes were not. What does Patterson recommend? He recommends we build a complete record, everything documented, every payment, every contract cross-referenced against county files. He says if Mallory attempts to enforce the liens, we need to be able to demonstrate in court that the contracts were obtained through deliberate misrepresentation to a party who was known to be unable to verify their contents. She looked at him directly. He also says we need witnesses. Anyone who can speak to Mallory's methods. The other ranchers, Jack said, if they'll talk. Patterson says one of them, the one who lost the 120 acres, has since left the territory. The other one is still here. Name of Clarence Webb. Runs a small cattle operation 12 miles east. I know Webb, Jack said. We've worked the same fence line twice. Would he talk to you? If I ask him straight. He picked up his hat from the hook by the door. I'll ride out today. Jack? She said his name without thinking. The first name slipping out naturally for the first time, and she felt it happen and didn't try to undo it. Be careful what you tell him about why you're asking. If word gets back to Mallory that we're building a case. I know how to have a conversation without showing my hand, Jack said. Something in his voice told her he'd been doing exactly that for a long time in circumstances more difficult than this one. He left. She heard the horse. She picked up Patterson's letter and read it a 3rd time, looking for anything she'd missed. At the bottom of the 2nd page in smaller writing that looked like an afterthought, but wasn't, Patterson had written, Miss Whitmore, I should tell you that Mallory has already made inquiries about your presence at the ranch. He asked 2 people in town who you are and how long you intend to stay. I thought you should know he is paying attention. She folded the letter and held it for a moment. Then she stood up, went to the office, and started building the document record Patterson had asked for. If Mallory was watching, the answer was to work faster. Jack came back from Webb's place in the early evening. He came into the office without knocking, which he'd stopped doing about 2 weeks ago, and pulled a chair up to the desk. His face had a look she was starting to recognize, the look of a man who has learned something that confirmed what he feared, but still stings when confirmed. Webb talked, Jack said. What did he say? Mallory came to him the same way he came to me. Same approach. County administrator, official documents, processing fees. Webb signed 4 contracts over about a year and a half. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. When Mallory tried to collect on a clause Webb hadn't known was there, Webb went to the county office on his own. Found the same thing we found, filings that were never submitted. He paused. Mallory told Webb the county clerk had made an error, said he'd sort it out. 2 weeks later, Mallory filed a court claim, and the Judge Arlen Price ruled in Mallory's favor in 3 days. 3 days, Anna said. Webb says most cases don't move through Price's court in 3 weeks. Anna sat back. So Mallory has the judge. Had him for that case. Whether he still does. Jack shook his head. Webb lost the land. He couldn't afford to appeal. He said he's been thinking about leaving the territory since then. Says the whole system's rotten. Did he say whether he'd be willing to make a formal statement to Patterson? He'll think about it. Jack looked at her. He's scared. Mallory had someone watching his place for 2 months after the court ruling. Just watching. Not doing anything. Just making sure Webb knew he was seen. Anna thought about that for a moment. The specific calculation of it. Not a threat anyone could report. Just a presence. Just the message, I know where you are, and I remember you. There's something else, Jack said. She looked at him. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. He set it on the desk. This was tacked to Webb's fence post when I arrived. Webb said it wasn't there this morning. Anna unfolded it. It was a short note, handwritten, the language formal and pleasant, in the way that threats are sometimes more frightening when they're polite. It informed Mr. Jack Holloway that Victor Mallory and Associates would be initiating a formal review of outstanding contract obligations, and that Mr. Holloway was encouraged to consult with a legal representative at his earliest convenience. It was signed by Mallory and dated that day. He'd known Jack was at Webb's place. The room felt slightly smaller than it had before. "He's watching us," Anna said. "He's been watching us," Jack said, "since I turned him away at the gate." She set the note down carefully. "He's moving faster than I expected. Patterson said he might wait, let us get comfortable, then act." "Mallory's not a patient man when he feels threatened," Jack said. "He's used to moving first. Then we move faster than he does." She pulled the document file she'd been building toward her. "How far are you in the reading? Honestly?" The question surprised him. She could see it in the slight shift of his posture, the change in his eyes from case strategy to something more personal. "Short words," he said. "Common ones. I can read the words in a sentence slowly if I know some of them." "I need you to be able to read a contract clause," she said. "Not fluently, but enough to follow along while I read it aloud. Enough that in a courtroom, if someone asks you whether you understood a document you signed, you can say honestly that you now know what the words mean." He understood what she was asking. She could see him understand it, the shift from present to strategic, from where he was to where he needed to be. "How long?" he asked. 6 weeks if we work every day, more than 40 minutes. "Then we work more than 40 minutes, he said. They did. The lessons moved from the kitchen table to wherever the day allowed, the office in the mornings before ranch work, the kitchen in the evenings, once memorably, in the barn when a mare was foaling and Jack wouldn't leave her, and Anna brought the reading sheets out, and they sat in the hay, and she held the lamp while he traced letters, and the mare labored in the next stall. He was faster than she'd initially estimated. Not because she'd underestimated his intelligence, she hadn't, but because something had changed in him since Mallory's note. The distant possibility of a court case had become an immediate one, and Jack Holloway, she was learning, moved toward immediate problems with a focus that was almost frightening in its intensity. He stopped practicing just his name. He began writing out words from the lesson sheets in the evenings on his own, and in the mornings she found the papers filled with his handwriting, the large, pressed hard letters becoming gradually more confident, the spacing evening out. One morning she found he'd copied out an entire sentence from the primer. A simple sentence. "The man owns the land," written 20 times in a row. On the 21st line, he'd added his own sentence beneath it. "The man reads the contract, not in the primer, his own." She left the paper where it was and didn't mention it. Mrs. Delgado noticed the change in the household before Anna had named it to herself. One evening, she sat down across from Anna at the kitchen table after Jack had gone out to do his final check on the animals and said without preamble, "He's different." "He's learning quickly," Anna said. "Not just the reading," Mrs. Delgado said. She poured herself a small cup of coffee. "He talks more. Not a lot, he's not going to become a man who talks a lot, but more than before." She wrapped her hands around the cup. "Before you came, he'd go 2-3 days without a real conversation. I'd talk to him, and he'd answer in 2 words or he'd nod. I thought it was just his nature." "It might partly be," Anna said. "No." Mrs. Delgado shook her head. "It's shame. A man who thinks he's stupid keeps his mouth closed to protect himself. He doesn't ask questions because asking questions shows what you don't know. He doesn't argue because arguing draws attention." She looked at her coffee. Jack Holloway is not a stupid man. He's a man who spent 36 years believing he might be. Anna was quiet. You didn't fix that, Mrs. Delgado said. That's not something someone else can fix, but you made him think it might not be true. She looked up. That's not a small thing. Anna thought about the sentence he'd added to the primer page. The man reads the contract. No, she said. It's not small. Mallory came back on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the note on Webb's fence post. This time he didn't come alone. He had a man with him, not introduced, not explained, simply present in the way that an implied threat is present. The man stood near the wagon and said nothing, and looked at the ranch buildings with the assessing look of someone who has been told to assess. Mallory himself came to the front of the house and asked for Jack, and Jack came out. Anna positioned herself in the doorway of the office, which was visible from the front yard. She had a file of papers in her hands. She held them in a way that was visible. Mallory saw her. He tipped his hat. She nodded. Jack, Mallory said, turning back. I sent a notice about the contract review. I hope you received it. I received it, Jack said. Good, good. I want to be clear, this isn't adversarial. We've had a good working relationship, and I'd like to keep it that way. His voice was as smooth and warm as it always was, and Anna thought he's very good at this. He has done this many times. He knows exactly how much warmth to use. I just need to verify that the payment schedule is current and go over the terms of the outstanding balance. What outstanding balance? Jack said. The balance specified in the third and fourth contracts, the terms past the initial payment period. Mallory pulled a paper from his coat. As I explained when we signed. Let me have that, Jack said. Mallory held it out. Jack took it. And Anna's breath caught. Jack looked at it. Not long, not fluently, but he held it in both hands, and his eyes moved across the top portion of the page, slow and deliberate, and he turned it over and looked at the back, and then he turned it face up again. The amount listed here, Jack said, pointing to the second paragraph. What does that represent? Mallory blinked. Just once. As I said, the outstanding. What does it represent? Jack said again. Not in general. Specifically. Another blink. The smoothness required a little more maintenance suddenly. It represents the accumulated interest on the initial processing fee per the terms agreed. Bring it here, Anna called from the doorway. Both men turned. Mallory's eyes moved from Anna to the papers in her hands to the file she was holding, and she saw the calculation happen in his face, not just what she was, but what she might know and how much. Bring Mr. Holloway's document here and let me look at the interest clause, Anna said. Her voice was level and academic, the voice she used when she was explaining to a child why their arithmetic was wrong. If the calculation is standard, it should take me about 2 minutes to verify. Mallory smiled. It was an excellent smile, practiced and easy. Miss Whitmore, is it? I don't believe we need to make this complicated. This is really between Jack and the document, Anna said. Jack walked it over to her. She read the interest clause. She read it twice the same way Patterson read documents, which she had borrowed deliberately. She was aware that Mallory was watching her, that the unnamed man by the wagon was watching her, that Jack was standing 2 feet away. The clause was not standard. The interest rate specified was 3 times the county standard, compounded in a way that turned the original payment into a debt that grew faster than it could be paid. And the trigger for that interest clause was not anything Jack had missed paying, it was the mere act of Mallory declaring a review. He could initiate the interest clock whenever he chose. She looked up at Mallory. Where is this interest rate sourced from? She asked. It's the rate agreed in the original. It's 3 times the rate specified in Oklahoma Territory lending guidelines, she said. And the trigger for compounding isn't a missed payment. It's your own discretionary review. She tilted the paper toward him, showing him the clause. You're claiming the right to impose compounding interest simply by deciding to, at any time, for any reason. The smile on Mallory's face didn't disappear. It shifted. Something underneath it showed for just a moment, not anger, something colder than anger. And then the smile settled back into place, thinner now. "I think there may be some misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "These are standard terms that I'm happy to clarify." "With a lawyer present," Jack said. Mallory turned to him. "Anything else you want to discuss about those contracts?" Jack said. "You discuss with Patterson." He said it the same way he said everything, flat, unhurried, the temperature of a man who has made a decision and is informing someone of it rather than negotiating. "You've got his name." Mallory was quiet for exactly 1 second. Anna counted it. "I know Patterson," Mallory said. "Mallory." "Good," Jack said. "Then you know how to reach him." He stepped back slightly, not aggressive, not retreating, just repositioning the way a man positions himself when a conversation is over. "I've got work to do." Mallory held the smile for another moment. He looked at Anna once more, a longer look this time, the kind that's meant to be seen, that's intended to communicate something without saying it. She met it without looking away. He got into his wagon. The other man got in beside him. They left. Jack came and stood in the doorway beside Anna, and they watched the wagon until the road bent and it disappeared. "He's going to move quickly now," Jack said. "Yes," Anna said. "He knows we've read the contracts." "Can Patterson?" "I'm writing to him tonight." She was already thinking through what the letter needed to say, the sequence, the timing. "Jack." She paused. "There's something else. The interest clause, the way it's structured, it's connected to a larger claim. If he takes this to court, the total amount he'll argue is owed—" She stopped and made herself say it without softening it. "It would exceed the assessed value of the ranch." The silence was absolute. Jack turned to look at her. His face was still in the deepest version of that stillness, not calm, not controlled, but the stillness of something fundamental being processed. "He's trying to take the ranch," Jack said. "He's built a legal argument that could let him," Anna said. "He's been building it for 2.5 years. She watched that land, watched him carry it. He didn't break. She'd expected something, not collapse, not from him, but some kind of fracture, some visible crack. Instead, he took a breath and let it out slowly, and looked out at the land that his father had worked, and he had worked after him, and he said, 'What do we do?'" Anna felt something shift in her chest at those 3 words. Not his vulnerability, though there was that, and it was real, but his trust. He had said, "What do we do?" not, "What do I do?" He had said it the way partners say things. "We build the case faster than he builds his," she said. "We need the county clerk to formally document the missing filings. We need Webb on record. We need Patterson to file a preemptive challenge." She looked at him. "And we need you to be able to stand in front of a judge and read a portion of those contracts in your own words." He held her gaze. "Then teach me faster," he said. That night, for the first time, the lesson ran past midnight. Not because Anna pushed it, because Jack wouldn't stop. They went through every common legal term she could pull from the contracts: lien, encumbrance, compounding interest, collateral default, and she wrote each word in large letters, and they worked it until he could read it off the page and say what it meant. When she finally set down her pencil and said it was enough for one night, he picked it back up. "One more," he said. "Jack? One more." He looked up at her, not demanding, something more complicated than demanding. "I spent 2 years not knowing what those words meant and letting a man use that against me. One more word." She looked at him across the table, this man who had lifted her trunk off a platform without asking, who had said right and decent aren't always the same thing, who had spent 36 years keeping his mouth closed to protect himself from a shame he'd never earned. She picked up her pencil. "Fraud," she said, and wrote it on the page. Fraud. She looked at him. "Do you know what it means?" "Lying for money," he said. "Intentional deception to secure unfair gain," she said. "More precise." He traced the word with his finger. "Fraud," he said. "Yes," she said. He wrote it out, once, twice, 5 times. The pencil pressed hard. On the 6th line he wrote it, and then sat back and looked at it and said, "I'm not letting him have this ranch." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was the same voice he used for facts about the land, the voice of a man stating a condition rather than expressing a hope. "No," Anna said. "You're not." Mrs. Delgado had long since gone to bed. The lamp was burning low. Outside the Oklahoma Territory was dark and wide and indifferent the way it always was. Inside, 2 people sat at a kitchen table with a word written 6 times on a piece of paper, and neither of them was willing to be the first to put out the lamp. Patterson's letter arrived on a Monday, and it arrived badly. Not in tone, Patterson was always measured but in content. He had filed the preemptive challenge with the court on Friday. By Saturday morning, Judge Arlen Price had already assigned the case a hearing date. 14 days out. 14 days. Anna read the letter standing at the office desk, then sat down and read it again. Patterson had also written in his careful, understated way that he had attempted to research Judge Price's recent rulings on contract disputes in the territory. Of the 11 cases in the past 2 years involving Victor Mallory's company, Price had ruled in Mallory's favor 9 times. The other 2 had been settled before judgment. 9 out of 11. She set the letter down and sat with that number. Jack came in from the morning's work and saw her face before she said a word. He pulled a chair up and sat across the desk. "Tell me." She told him. All of it. The hearing date, the ruling history, Price's record. She did not soften any of it because he'd asked her early on to never soften things for him, and she hadn't. When she finished, Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 14 days. Yes. Is that enough time? For Patterson to build the case, yes. For the county clerk to formally certify the missing filings, Patterson says he'll push for it this week. She paused. For you to be able to read enough of the contract language in court to demonstrate you were misled. She met his eyes. We have to make it enough time. He nodded once and stood up. Then we start now, he said. Not tonight. Now. She pulled the contracts out of the file. They worked through in the morning. Jack sat across from her with the documents between them, and she read each clause aloud slowly, and then had him follow her finger along the words as she reread them, and then had him read them back to her. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but in a way that showed the words were no longer just shapes. They were information he could extract and use. Mrs. Delgado brought food at noon, and neither of them stopped working long enough to sit properly for it. By mid-afternoon, Jack could read the critical lien clause, the one that would be at the center of the court argument, halting but accurate. Every word. He knew what each one meant. Again, he said when he'd finished. Jack, again. She read it with him again. Webb came to the ranch 2 days later unannounced, arriving just after supper when the light was going thin. He tied his horse at the post and stood at the door with his hat in his hands, and the look of a man who has made a hard decision and is acting on it before he can unmake it. I'll talk to your lawyer, he said when Jack opened the door. Whatever he needs. Jack stepped back to let him in. What changed your mind? Webb came inside and sat down at the kitchen table. He was a weathered man in his late 50s, the kind of face that's been worked on by decades of outdoor labor. His hands around his hat brim were not quite steady. Mallory sent someone to my place again, he said. Yesterday. Didn't do anything. Just rode up slow, sat on the fence line for 20 minutes, rode away. He looked at the table. My wife saw it from the window. She was shaking when I got in. He looked up. I'm done being quiet about what he did. Anna was at the doorway. Webb looked at her. You're the one who read the contracts, he said. Yes, she said. Pruitt turned you away. He did. Webb was quiet for a moment. Foolish man, he said. Not warmly, not as a compliment to her, just as a plain statement of assessment. Then he looked back at Jack. What does your lawyer need from me? A written statement, Jack said. Everything Mallory told you, what you signed, what the county records showed when you checked. Patterson will help you put it in the right form. I can write it myself, Webb said with a slight stiffening of pride. I know, Jack said. He said it without any particular emphasis, just confirmation. But Anna heard what was underneath it, the recognition of one man for another man's pride in a capability that the first man had never possessed. She went to the office and got Patterson's address and a clean sheet of paper for Webb and left them to talk. She stood in the kitchen and thought about what 9 out of 11 meant in practical terms. It meant that walking into Price's courtroom with a solid case was necessary but not sufficient. It meant they needed the case to be so clear, so thoroughly documented, so publicly exposed, that ruling against it would be professionally dangerous rather than just inconvenient. That meant more than Patterson. That meant visibility. She went back to the office and started writing a letter. Not to Patterson, to the Oklahoma Territory Gazette. The letter to the Gazette was not accusatory. She was too careful for that. An accusatory letter from a woman with no local standing would be dismissed, or worse, would warn Mallory in a way that gave him time to prepare. Instead, she wrote a careful factual account of how land contract fraud worked in the territory, using the county records as documentary evidence, and noting that a hearing was upcoming in the Claremore courthouse that would bring several of these cases into the public record. She signed it with her name and her teaching credentials, which she hadn't used for anything since arriving in the territory, and which now felt like exactly the right tool for exactly this moment. She showed it to Jack before she sent it. He read it. He took longer than she expected. She was used now to how long his reading took, and this was longer, and when he looked up, his face had an expression she hadn't seen before. "You're making this visible," he said. "If the hearing is public record, and if the Gazette has already printed a factual account of the documentation, then a ruling that ignores that documentation becomes a public act," she said. "It becomes something the judge has to answer for beyond the courtroom." Jack looked at the letter again. "Price will know you wrote this before the hearing." "Yes." "He'll be angry." "Probably." "Mallory will be angry." "Certainly." He looked at her. "You're not worried about that." "I'm worried about you losing the ranch," she said. "I'm not particularly worried about Victor Mallory's feelings." Something moved through his expression, something she might have called warmth if he'd been a different kind of man. On Jack Holloway, it looked like steadiness, like the feeling of solid ground. "Send it," he said. She sent it. The Gazette ran the piece 4 days before the hearing. Not on the front page, but on the second, with a headline that was careful and factual. "County land records show unregistered filings in multiple contract disputes, hearing scheduled." Anna bought 3 copies at the general store. The reaction in Claremore was immediate. Not loud. This was a town that expressed things sideways in looks and shifts of conversation, and small pauses but immediate. People who had passed Anna on the main street with the barely there acknowledgement reserved for newcomers now stopped to speak to her. The clerk from the county land office found her at Caldwell's boarding house, where she'd gone to visit Mrs. Caldwell, and said quietly that he'd been told to pull the Mallory filing records for the past 3 years and make certified copies of everything, and he'd done it, and if she needed him to testify, he would. "Were you pressured to file things the way they appeared in the records?" Anna asked him carefully. The clerk was young, and the question made him look younger. "No," he said. "The filings just weren't there. He said he'd submitted them. I had no reason to doubt it." He paused. "I should have checked. I know I should have checked." "You'll have the chance to say what you know," Anna said. "That's what matters now." She reported all of this to Jack that evening. He listened, asked 3 precise questions, and then said, "Patterson called it a corruption network in his letter. How many people do you think are in it?" "I don't know," she said. "Mallory Price, almost certainly. Possibly someone at the county administration office, though it may be that Mallory simply exploited access that was legitimately given." She thought about it. "There's also the question of who appointed Price." Jack looked at her sharply. "Circuit judges in the territory are appointed by the federal commissioner's office," she said. If someone in that chain has a connection to Mallory... She stopped. I sent a copy of the Gazette piece to the Federal Land Commissioner's office in Guthrie this morning. Registered mail. Jack stared at her. Patterson doesn't know I did that yet, she said. I'll tell him tomorrow. Anna? He said her name the way she'd said his, the first name coming out without ceremony, because by now that was simply what they were to each other. That was either very smart or very dangerous. It was both, she said. But if Price knows the federal office has the documentation, he has to weigh the risk of ruling in Mallory's favor against the risk of federal scrutiny. Or he rules for Mallory anyway and buries it. He might, she said. But that's a different calculation than ruling for Mallory when nobody outside this county is watching. Jack was quiet for a long moment. He turned his hat in his hands. She knew that gesture so well by now, knew it meant he was at the edge of something working through it. The Mallory contracts, he said. The ones with missing county filings. If Patterson presents those in court and the clerk testifies, the filings were never submitted. Then Mallory has to explain where the money went, Anna said. The processing fees Jack paid for filings that were never filed. That's fraud, Jack said. He said the word the way he'd written it on the paper that night, flat and certain and without distance. That's fraud, Anna agreed. Deputy Harris Cole came to the ranch the morning before the hearing. Anna had not expected him. She knew who he was. She'd seen him twice in town, a lean man in his early 40s with the careful eyes of someone who observed more than he acted on, which she'd originally read as passivity and now suspected was something more like patience. He came without a wagon on horseback, and he tied his horse at the post and knocked on the door with his hat already off. Jack let him in. Cole looked at Anna when he came into the kitchen and said, "You wrote the Gazette piece." "Yes," she said. "I've been investigating Victor Mallory for 7 months," he said. He sat down without being asked, the ease of a man who doesn't stand on ceremony. "I've had nothing that would hold in Price's court. No witnesses willing to go on record. No documentation that Mallory couldn't explain away as administrative error." He looked between them. Until now. Anna felt the kitchen go very still. "What do you have?" Jack asked. "What you have," Cole said. "The county records, your payment history, and now Webb's statement to Patterson, which Patterson filed with the court this morning." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "And this, which I've been sitting on for 3 months because I didn't have anything to attach it to." He unfolded it on the table. It was a bank transfer record, a copy official stamped showing a payment from Mallory Land and Contract Associates to a private account. The account name was partially redacted, but the amount was visible, and the date corresponded to within 2 weeks of the ruling in Webb's case. A payment to a private account 2 weeks after Price ruled in Mallory's favor. "Is that—" Anna started. "I can't say what it is," Cole said carefully. "Not in this room, but I can introduce it as evidence in a federal proceeding if a federal proceeding is opened." He looked at Anna. "The federal commissioner's office contacted me this morning, after they received a registered letter." Anna folded her hands on the table. "They're sending an observer to tomorrow's hearing," Cole said. "Not to intervene, they're not there yet, but to observe and report." "Price will know," Jack said. "Price already knows," Cole said. "I made sure of that." He paused. "I made sure through a source who I knew would tell Mallory, which means Mallory also knows." "You want them nervous," Anna said. "I want them calculating," Cole said. "A nervous man makes loud mistakes. A man who's calculating might decide the smarter move is to let this case go." He looked at Jack. "It depends on how much they think they can still bury." Jack looked at the bank transfer record on the table. "And what do you think?" Cole looked back at him evenly. "I think Mallory's made too many moves too fast since your accounts manager arrived. He panicked. Panicked men leave evidence." He stood folded, the paper, put it back in his coat. "I'll be at the courthouse tomorrow." He left. Mrs. Delgado came into the kitchen from the hallway where she had apparently been listening without apology and set the coffee pot on the table. She sat down across from them and poured 3 cups. "Well?" she said. "Well," Jack said. Anna picked up her cup. Her hand was steady. She was aware of this, had been aware through all of it, of how steady her hands were, and thought it was probably because everything she'd done, every letter written and record checked and clause analyzed, had been the exact work she'd been trained to do. Not trained in a frontier law office. Trained in a Boston schoolroom in the precise and patient work of taking complex things apart and making them legible to someone who hadn't understood them before. Pruitt had called her too educated. She thought about that now with a clarity that was almost funny in the grim way that justice sometimes has a dark humor at its edges. "I need to prepare for tomorrow," she said. "What do you need?" Jack asked. "The contracts, all 7, in order." She looked at him. "And I need you to practice reading the lien clause one more time tonight." "I know it," he said. "I know you know it. Practice it anyway." She met his eyes. "Tomorrow you're going to say it in a courtroom, and there are going to be people in that room who still believe you can't read. I want the first time you open your mouth and prove them wrong to be impossible to dismiss." He held her gaze. "Practice it," she said. "All right," he said. They stayed at the table while Mrs. Delgado quietly cleaned around them, and Jack read the lien clause aloud 4 times, and each time it was clearer, steadier, the words belonging more fully to him. On the 4th reading, he didn't stumble on a single word. Anna listened to him and thought about a depot platform in late October, and a man who picked up a stranger's trunk without asking, and how far they had come from that moment to this table, and how many more miles there were still to go. "Once more," she said. He looked up at her. Something in his face, not the near smile, not the steadiness, but something that lived between those two things, something she didn't have a word for yet. "You're harder on me than I am on myself," he said. "Yes," she said, "because I know what you're capable of." He picked up the contract. He read it again. It was perfect. The courthouse in Claremore was full by 8 in the morning, which told Anna everything she needed to know about how thoroughly the Gazette piece had done its work. She and Jack arrived with Patterson at 7:30, which meant they were there before most of the crowd, before Mallory, before Cole. Took his position near the back wall, and before the man from the federal commissioner's office settled into a seat in the 3rd row with a leather satchel on his lap, and the careful, neutral expression of someone who is there to watch and remember everything. Patterson had prepared them both the previous evening. What to expect, what order the arguments would go, what Mallory's attorney would likely do. He was a careful man, and a good one, but Anna had noticed that even Patterson's careful voice had carried something tight in it when he'd walked through the judge's record. 9 out of 11. She carried the full file of documents. 7 contracts. The county records, the certified copies the clerk had prepared, Patterson's compiled evidence brief, and her own written analysis of the interest clause. 4 pages precise and plain, the kind of writing she'd learned to do for school administrators who needed to understand something quickly and without ambiguity. Jack carried nothing. He didn't need to. Everything he needed was already inside him. They sat at the plaintiff's table. Jack and Patterson in front, Anna directly behind, close enough to pass documents and speak quietly. Mallory came in 10 minutes later with his attorney, a man named Briggs, who had the expensive coat and rapid eyes of someone hired for situations that required both aggression and deniability. Mallory himself looked exactly as he always looked, composed, pleasant, the warmth calibrated precisely. He glanced at Anna when he came in. She looked back at him without expression. He looked away first. Judge Price entered at 9 o'clock exactly. He was a heavier man than Anna had imagined from the description, not physically imposing, but carrying himself with the particular authority of someone who had sat at the front of a room for a long time and was accustomed to the room arranging itself around him. He settled into his chair, looked at the gallery, looked at both tables, and his eyes paused for one fraction of a second on the man in the 3rd row with the leather satchel. Just one fraction, but Anna caught it. He knows, she thought. Cole had made sure of that, and now they would see what a man does when he knows he is being watched. "This court is in session," Price said. "Mallory Land and Contract Associates versus Holloway. Mr. Briggs, you may proceed." Briggs was good. Anna had expected that, and she was right. He laid out Mallory's case in clean, confident language. The contracts were valid and signed. The payment obligations were clear. Jack Holloway had benefited from the services provided, and the outstanding balance as calculated under the contract terms was now owed in full. He presented the contracts as exhibits. He spoke about the processing fees as though their legitimacy was so obvious that questioning them was almost impolite. He did not mention the county filing records. Patterson stood when Briggs finished. He was quieter than Briggs, less performance, more precision. And Anna had come to understand that this was not a weakness. He began with the county clerk's certified records. He named each contract, named the filing date Mallory had claimed, and named the county record that showed no such filing had occurred. 3 contracts, 3 payments, no filings. He called the county clerk to the stand. The clerk, young, ink-stained, visibly nervous but visibly determined, confirmed every item. He answered Briggs's cross-examination in short factual sentences that didn't give Briggs anything to reshape. The filings were not there. He had checked. They were not there. Briggs said it must be an administrative error. The clerk said the filing log was complete and had no gaps corresponding to the claimed dates. Briggs moved on. Patterson then presented Anna's written analysis of the interest clause. He entered it as an exhibit and read the key section aloud, the part about the compounding rate being 3 times the territory standard, and the trigger being Mallory's own discretionary review rather than any default by Holloway. He was calm and methodical. He let the words do what the words did. Briggs objected that the analysis was prepared by an unqualified party. Patterson pointed out that Miss Whitmore held teaching certification from the Boston Normal School, that her analysis cited the specific Oklahoma Territory lending regulations, and that the court was welcome to compare the cited regulation to the contract clause directly. Price looked at the analysis. He looked at it for longer than necessary. Then Patterson said, "Your Honor, I'd like to call Mr. Jack Holloway." The gallery went quiet when Jack stood. Anna had been in this town for 6 weeks. She knew by now what the town thought of Jack Holloway, the rancher who didn't talk, who kept to himself, who the man at the depot had called too few words as an insult. She knew what Mallory's attorney thought because Briggs had barely glanced at Jack during the proceedings, the way you don't bother to watch someone you don't expect to be a problem. Jack walked to the stand, the way he walked everywhere. The same pace, the same steadiness, not performing confidence, but simply being it, because he'd decided that was what he was going to do, and he'd made that decision before he'd gotten out of bed this morning. Patterson handed him the 3rd Mallory contract, the one with the lien clause. "Mr. Holloway," Patterson said, "can you tell the court what Victor Mallory told you this contract covered?" Jack looked at Patterson, not at the contract yet. "He told me it was a water access registration. He said the county required formal filing, or I'd risk losing legal access to the creek on my north boundary. He said the fee was $40 and that it was standard." "And based on that explanation, you signed?" "Yes." "Mr. Holloway, I'd like you to look at the document in your hands, specifically paragraph 3. Can you read paragraph 3 for the court?" Briggs was on his feet immediately. "Objection. Counsel is Mr. Holloway." Patterson said, steady and unhurried, "Please read paragraph 3. Jack looked at the contract. The courtroom was so quiet that Anna could hear the person beside her breathing. He read it, not fast, not fluently, but clearly every word correct in the deliberate voice of a man who knows exactly what he is saying and exactly why he is saying it in front of this many people. He read the lien clause, the compounding interest provision, the discretionary review trigger, every word of it. When he finished, he set the document on the railing in front of him and looked at Patterson. "When Victor Mallory explained this contract to you," Patterson said, "did he describe those terms?" "No," Jack said. "Did he mention the lien provision?" "No." "Did he explain that the interest clause could be triggered by his own decision rather than any failure on your part?" "No." Patterson turned to look at Mallory at the other table. Then he turned back. "Mr. Holloway, you've read that clause in this courtroom today. In your own words, what does it mean?" Jack looked at the gallery, not at Mallory, at the room, at the people, at the man in the third row with the satchel. "It means he built himself a legal door into my property," Jack said, "hidden inside a document he knew I couldn't verify. It means every contract I signed wasn't what he said it was. And it means he came back 2 years later to walk through that door." He paused. "That's what it means." The gallery didn't erupt. This wasn't that kind of moment. But there was a sound, a collective quiet exhale, the sound of a room absorbing something that cannot be unheard. Briggs's cross-examination was aggressive. He pressed Jack on his understanding at the time of signing, implying repeatedly that Jack had been negligent in not seeking independent review. Jack answered every question directly, without defensiveness, without losing the flat, steady quality that Anna had come to understand was not coldness, but precision. At one point, Briggs said, "Mr. Holloway, isn't it true that you signed these documents of your own free will?" "I signed them based on explanations that weren't true," Jack said. "A man can't give informed consent to terms he was never honestly told." Briggs paused. In that pause, Anna saw at the exact moment Briggs realized the man on the stand was not what he'd prepared for. Not the silent, manageable rancher who would get confused under pressure and contradict himself. Someone who had been thinking about this for weeks, who understood what every word on those pages meant, and why who could not be outmaneuvered by a question he'd already anticipated and answered in his own mind a dozen times. Briggs sat down. Anna was called next. She had not expected this. Patterson had not told her. When he called her name, she looked at him, and he gave her one small nod. He'd decided it was necessary, and he'd made the call without consulting her, which she respected because there wasn't time, and he was right. She sat in the witness chair with the document file in her hands. Patterson asked her to describe her findings at the county land office. She described them specifically, methodically, citing dates and document numbers. She described the interest clause analysis and walked the court through the calculation of what the clause would actually cost Holloway Ranch under Mallory's stated enforcement plan. The number, when she spoke it aloud, moved through the gallery like a current. It was more than the ranch's assessed land value. She said so. She described the pattern across all 7 contracts, the surface legitimacy, the buried clauses, the systematic targeting of a landowner whose inability to read the documents had been, she stated carefully and factually, a known condition exploited by the opposing party. Briggs came at her hard. He questioned her credentials. She cited them. He questioned her standing in the territory. She cited her employment. He questioned whether she had personal motivations here. He let a slight something enter his voice, an implication that was not quite said for defending the man who had given her a position after she'd arrived as a mail-order bride and been refused. The gallery stirred, some noise. Anna looked at Briggs steadily. She felt very calm, the way she felt when a problem was completely clear. "My motivation," she said, "is that I can read. The documents in this case say what they say. I read them and reported what they say. My personal circumstances have no effect on the words in those contracts, and they have no effect on the county records, and they have no effect on the calculation I've put before this court." She paused. "If Mr. Briggs would like to challenge the arithmetic, I'm happy to walk through it again." Briggs did not challenge the arithmetic. When she stepped down, Webb took the stand. He was brief and factual, the way a man is when he has decided exactly what he's going to say and is not going to be pulled off it. He described Mallory's approach, the contracts, the county filing he'd discovered had never been submitted, and the court ruling that had cost him 120 acres. He named the date. He named the amount. He named Judge Price's ruling date. Price on the bench did not move his face, but Anna watched his hands, and his hands were not still. Patterson made his closing argument in 15 minutes. He did not perform. He summarized the missing filings, the fraudulent interest clause, the pattern across multiple ranches, the bank transfer record. Cole had submitted through the Federal Observer's office that morning as a separate filing. The systematic construction of debt obligations designed to exceed the value of the property they were secured against. He used the word fraud once at the end, and then he sat down. Briggs's closing was longer and louder and less precise. When he finished, Price called a recess. The recess lasted 47 minutes. Anna sat in the courthouse gallery with Jack on one side, and Mrs. Delgado, who had arrived an hour into the proceedings, and sat in the second row without announcement on the other. She held the document file in her lap. Nobody spoke very much. Jack said once quietly, "Whatever happens, wait," Anna said. He looked at her. "Wait," she said again, not impatiently. "Just wait. Don't say whatever comes after that yet. Let it wait." He nodded and looked at the front of the room. 47 minutes. Price came back. He sat. He looked at his papers. He looked at the man in the third row with the satchel. He looked at the gallery, which had not shrunk in the recess if anything had grown. He began to speak. He spoke for a long time, and Anna tracked every sentence. He said that the evidentiary record presented by the defense was substantial and detailed. He said that the missing county filings represented at minimum a serious irregularity, requiring further investigation by the appropriate authorities. He said that the interest clause as written was not enforceable under Oklahoma territory, lending regulations as cited in the defense's analysis. He said that the total claim presented by Mallory Land and Contract Associates could not be upheld by this court on the basis of the evidence as presented. He ruled for Holloway. He also and Anna heard this with a clarity that felt like cold water stated formally, that the county clerk's certified records raised questions of potential fraud in the filing process, that he was referring to the Federal Commissioner's Office for investigation. He referred it himself, before the Federal Observer could act. He moved first, which meant he was making a calculation distance himself from Mallory now, before the federal investigation reached him and perhaps survive it. It was not justice in the purest sense. It was a man protecting himself, and that protection happened to align with the right outcome. Anna was clear-eyed enough to know the difference and practical enough to accept it. The ranch was Jack's. The liens were void. The claim was dismissed. The courthouse steps were loud, in a way the interior had not been. People who had been quiet inside found their voices outside, and there was a particular quality to the noise. Not celebration exactly, but the sound of a town that has seen something and is processing what it means. Cole found them on the steps. He shook Jack's hand and looked at Anna and said, "The federal office will open a full investigation. Mallory knew it before the ruling. I could see it in how he sat in there. He's already thinking about what he can negotiate." "Webb's land?" Anna asked immediately. Cole looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, a kind of reassessment, as if he was updating a calculation in real time. "It'll be part of the investigation. I can't promise you an outcome." "Push for it," she said. "I intend to," he said. Mrs. Delgado was crying efficiently and without apparent embarrassment into a handkerchief she'd produced from somewhere. Patterson was speaking to the county clerk. Webb stood near the bottom of the steps with his hat in his hands and an expression that was not quite relief, too complicated for that, and Jack went down to him, and they spoke for a few minutes quietly, and whatever Jack said made Webb nod slowly, the nod of a man receiving something he'd needed for a long time. When Jack came back up the steps, he stood beside Anna. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The town moved around them. The ordinary noise of a November morning in Claremore went on without waiting for either of them to finish feeling what they were feeling. "It's over," Jack said. "This part," Anna said. He turned to look at her. "What's the next part?" She thought about the ranch, the accounts she'd reorganized, the correspondence she'd written the suppliers. She'd contacted the ledger that was clean for the first time in years. She thought about the evening lessons that had started as a transaction and become something neither of them had a clean word for. She thought about what Mrs. Delgado had said. A man who thinks he's stupid keeps his mouth closed to protect himself, and how Jack's voice in that courtroom had been anything but closed. "The ranch needs proper legal contracts going forward," she said. "Real ones with a lawyer who isn't Mallory. The supplier agreements need to be renegotiated. The water access rights need to be formally registered, actually registered with the county. Patterson should handle all of it, but someone needs to review everything before it's signed. You, Jack said. If you want that, she said carefully. I want that, he said, flat and certain, the voice of a man stating a condition. I'm also thinking, she said, about the ranch workers. Not all of them can read. Some of them are in the same position you were in, signing things they can't verify, trusting people they have no way to check. She looked at him. If there were evening lessons not just for you. Do it, Jack said. She looked at him. Do it, he said again. Use whatever room you need. I'll make sure the men know they're welcome. He paused. Some of them won't come. Pride. Some will, she said. Yes, he said. Some will. The crowd on the steps was thinning. Patterson came up and shook their hands and said he would have paperwork for them both within the week, and said it with the slight warmth of a careful man who allows himself to show satisfaction when it's genuinely earned. When he left, Anna and Jack were standing on the courthouse steps with the November air around them, and the town going on below and the road back to the ranch stretching out beyond the edge of Claremore into the wide Oklahoma territory. Jack, she said. Yes. What you did in there reading that clause. She turned to look at him directly. I need you to know that was not a small thing. The way you read it, what you said after. She held his gaze. That will be what people remember about this day. Not the contracts and not the ruling. You reading those words aloud. He was quiet for a moment. I had a good teacher, he said. You did the work, she said. I handed you the tools. You built something with them. He turned his hat in his hands. She'd watched him do that 100 times by now, and she knew what it meant, the edge of something, the place just before he said what mattered most. I'd like you to stay, he said. Not as my accounts manager, not as my teacher. He looked at her. I'm asking plainly. I don't know how to ask any other way. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had carried her trunk without asking and said, right and decent aren't always the same thing, and read a legal clause in a crowded courtroom in a voice that hadn't trembled, not once. I know, she said. That's why I'm going to say yes. Something moved through his face, slow and thorough. Like the light changing over the land, he knew better than any book the particular expression of a man who has been braced for a long time and has just been told he can stop. He offered her his arm. Actually offered it, the formal gesture he'd never made on the day he'd walked her to Caldwell's boarding house, which felt like a different decade now. She took it. They walked down the courthouse steps together, and the town parted naturally around them, and the road opened ahead of them toward 800 acres of good Oklahoma land, and a kitchen table with a lamp and a stack of reading sheets and everything still to be built. They married in December in a simple ceremony at the Claremore Church, with Mrs. Delgado in the front row, and Webb and his wife behind her, and Patterson and Cole at the back. The minister was brief. Jack said what he needed to say in his flat, certain voice, and meant every word of it, which was how he did everything. The federal investigation into Victor Mallory opened in January. By March, Mallory had been indicted on 7 counts of contract fraud and 2 counts of bribery. Clarence Webb's land case was included in the Federal Review, and by summer, a settlement had been reached that returned 60 of the 120 acres to Webb's family. It was not everything, but it was something, and something built on the record that Anna's letters and Patterson's filings and Cole's patience had made possible. Judge Price resigned from the bench in February, citing health. Nobody in Claremore believed the reason. Nobody said so publicly. The evening literacy lessons at Holloway Ranch started in the new year, Tuesday and Thursday evenings in the main room, with the long kitchen table pulled to make space. The first session had 4 men, the second had 7. By spring, there were 11, ranging from a 19-year-old ranch hand to a 58-year-old man who had worked cattle his whole life and never told anyone he couldn't read a bill of sale. Jack sat in on the lessons sometimes. Not every time he had a ranch to run, but sometimes. He never positioned himself as an example, never made a speech about it. He just sat at the table with the other men and worked the same exercises because he was still learning too, and because his presence at that table said something that no speech could have said. Anna watched him one Tuesday evening. This man she had married, this man who had stood in a courtroom and read a legal document aloud in front of a room full of people who had expected him to fail, and she thought about a depot platform and a woman holding a book against her chest and the particular humiliation of being told her education was a flaw. She thought about what it had become instead. The ranch ran clean. The contracts were honest. The accounts were current and accurate and signed by people who understood what they were signing. The East Pasture and the North Water Access were formally registered, actually registered with the county, and the filing receipts were in the ledger where Anna could find them in 30 seconds. Jack read the land the same way he always had, by instinct and pattern, and the knowledge that lives in a man's hands and eyes after decades of work. And he read words now too, not the way some people read with ease and speed, but with the steady, deliberate accuracy of someone who built the skill from nothing and was not finished building it yet. One evening in the spring, he came in from the North Pasture and set a piece of paper on the kitchen table in front of Anna. She looked at it. It was a short letter, 3 paragraphs clear and well organized, addressed to the county land office, requesting formal documentation of the renewed water access registration. He had written it himself. All of it. No help. She read it through. The grammar was not perfect. The handwriting was large and pressed in and deliberate. Every word was correct. She looked up at him. He was watching her with those dark, quiet eyes that had given away so little when she'd first known him, and now she could read them the way he read the land, by what was beneath the surface, by what the patterns told you when you knew how to look. "It's good," she said. "Send it," he said. She folded the letter, addressed the envelope, and set it with the outgoing mail. Outside, the Oklahoma Territory was doing what it always did, wide and indifferent and enormous, the sky going all the way to the ground in every direction. Inside, the lamp was burning, and the lesson sheets were stacked on the corner of the table, and the ledger was open to the current page, and the ranch was whole, and the contracts were honest, and the man who had been told his silence was stupidity had written a letter to the county land office in his own hand. Some things cannot be taken from a person, not by shame, not by fraud, not by the calculated patience of a man who builds traps from other people's limitations. Knowledge once given freely and received with courage belongs to the one who holds it, and no court, no contract, and no corrupt man's scheme can ever take it back.